Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episodes number 149 and 150. This is a two-parter, and my guest in these two episodes is Dr. Asher Walden. And Asher got his PhD in philosophy and religious studies, and we talk about philosophy and spirituality. We also talk about something that he has undertaken recently, a project called the Empyrean Project, and we talk about that and what that consists of. So it was a wonderful conversation. I'm glad to be a part of bringing Asher's work to greater prominence, even if it's a small contribution on my part with my little show, but I feel as though he deserves to be put in the spotlight a little bit and have his work amplified. So I very much enjoyed the conversation, found it enriching, and I hope you do as well. Thank you so much. And I would like to welcome back Dr. Asher Walden to the IdeaCast interview series. This is part two, ostensibly, although we were having a discussion between the two. This could be part one as far as we're concerned. It's going to be a very nice conversation because, again, we had a pre-meet about a week ago. I can't even remember. And it was just real flowy, really nice. And we were just exploring some thoughts and ideas. In the other recorded conversation that I will for now call part one, and it's up to you, we were covering Asher's work and the project that he's undertaking. And so I will guide you to that, and you can learn about the Empyrean Project and the deck of cards that Asher developed. That's in the other conversation. But right now, we're going to take everything we had in that conversation and everything we had in our pre-meet and see where we go together in dialogue and what opens up in the space that we create. So, Asher, you mentioned something in the other conversation that really resonates with me, and I see it as an interesting aspect of modern Western society, and it is this perceptual. It's not a dogma. It's just a perceptual habit, I guess, that we have of us being for ourselves, being individual, fully individuated creatures that are autonomous in a system, and that it is only convenient to be part of a structure or a societal web, however you want to say that. And I think we touched on it briefly, that there's the freedom to see it as a kind of, it's not a duality, but more of just complementarity, union of opposites kind of scenario, wherein you are an individual that is responsible for the system that is the being, as well as the selfness that arises from the cognitive being, but also that you are fully enmeshed, fully ensconced in a system of society, of the commons, and all of this and that. I'll throw that out there, whatever you want to do with it, and I think that'll be the springboard to get us started. But really, in the West, it seems difficult to understand what is not a bifurcation, what is actually just, to me, on a spectrum or a continuum. So I'll hand that to you and see what you want to do with it.
Sure. Humans are complex, right? Mm-hmm. Not just in the sense that we sort of subjectively have a lot of desires and a lot of needs and a lot of interests and a lot of conflicts and a lot of different kinds of relationships with a lot of different kinds of people. The kind of experiential complexity of human life, the reason why it's so difficult for us to come up with a good organic and complete story of human life. That's what we really want, right? That's the goal. We want a story that makes sense and that actually integrates all of the information, all of the desires, all of the confusion, all of the violence, all of the poverty, all of the pleasures and pains of this world. What we want is a story that sort of makes sense of it. And that story is like our map. We know where we are and we know where we're going. And if that map has blank spots on it, or if that map doesn't make any sense, we have problems. We just don't work right. We're like hardware without software, or our software is glitchy, right? Or our software is telling us to do two very different things at the same time. And we feel that a lot, right? We feel those conflicts a lot. So what we want is a story. And the reason it's so difficult in our lives is because humans are so complex. Humans operate on many different kind of metaphysical levels at the same time. And the way I understand this, and which I actually have tried to capture in the structure of the cards, is as a series of sort of nested worlds within worlds within worlds. So think of this as, the first world is a kind of sheer quantum potential, right? It's the infinite of infinite. Anything could be anything could be anything, and it's huge. And within that precipitates out this network of actual existence, things that actually exist, right? And we call that, maybe materiality, or the material world. Okay, and that's big. It's not as big as the universe of infinite possibilities. It's a lot smaller, but it's a lot more concrete. And then within that world, there's certain places where molecular complexity arises. These molecular patterns, machines, molecules interacting with each other in these increasingly complex ways, in ways that, were not predictable from the potential space. Right? That's too far away. It's its own context. It's its own order of meaning. Molecular complexity. And then within molecular complexity, somewhere in molecular complexities, there's lots of complexity in the physical universe. But in some places, statistically very rare, but very important, that there's something happens where the molecular complexity gives rise to life. Right? And then within life, perception. Within life, so it's successive orders, the successive spheres is where the ancients talked about this, that we live in kind of concentric spheres, going from the kind of tightest order of being, pure being itself, this kind of emanating out. But nowadays we don't think of it in terms of emanating out in this Neoplatonic way. We think of it as involution, evolving inward to more and more complexity until we get, not just life forms, but life forms who talk to each other. And then there's this thing called language or society, within which information is encoded, and becomes part of our hardware. It becomes kind of a really important part of how we function. And then, so we are like orders and orders and orders of complexity, worlds within worlds within worlds, each sphere having its own laws, each sphere having its own patterns, its own rules, each sphere having its own kind of significant differences, its own kind of realm of what could possibly happen within it, right? And one thing that can happen within a world is that it can create a new world within the world, right? And then that's where we get eventually a human individual. This is very, very far down, right? Or far up, depending on which way, or within, of inward, inward, to the point where humans can create an entire universe of meaning just within our own minds, right? In ways that are different and distinct, right? And then so we get, and that's sort of where we are now, historically, or cosmically, right? We're at the point where instead of just being part of society, we are individuals within society. And instead of just being individuals, we're individuals who are creating cultural or imaginative worlds that, again, math, science, art, network theory, right? There's a kind of an imaginative world, which is a real world. It's real in the sense that we share it. It's robust. It has its rules. It has that which you can do, which you cannot do. Math works the way it works. It's an independent and sort of like a complete world. But of course, what makes math incomplete, famously, is that you don't know where it's going to stop. You don't know what possibilities it has within it. And there's something next. What's next? I don't know. I think about it all the time. I'm so curious what's happening next. But it's, there's something, and I have some ideas about it. I have some ideas about what that next thing will look like. And generally speaking, the keys or the hints or the clues of what can happen within one world or sphere or order of being or order of meaning are sort of dropped within, the larger sphere, right? So we look at culture, we look at math, we look at the archetypes, we look at spirituality, we look at, the ways in which the spirit appears in society and culture and economics and politics. And in every case, generally speaking, the pattern is many becoming one, many individuals joining together, many molecules forming a complex order, many complex molecules forming a cell, many cells forming a body, many people forming a community, right? Many ideas becoming many individual, every person is like a neuron in a complex brain. Right. Just as many neurons cooperate to form a higher order consciousness, a higher order form of life, just so humans already form networks of meaning that are like gods in some sense. They're beyond us. We can't, we can't even imagine what their life form is. These complex spirits that humans have contributed to form quantum physics, or relativity, or communism, right? Or professional golf, right? This is sort of an order of meaning that many people can participate in, and that has a life of its own, right? So the next thing I think is all of these different cultural products finding a way to interact into like a truly collective intelligence. And there's some interesting work I mentioned in the other video that we did that I was interested in popular science. And right now what I'm reading is network theory and information theory. And to me, as a philosopher of mind and as a theologian and as just someone who's interested in spirituality, this to me is embodied ascension. This is sort of what's going to happen, that there are kind of these nascent forms of collective intelligence, artificial intelligences, if you will, that are already out there, and they're already determining how we live in some good ways and some not so good ways. There are these forces that are it's not just sort of individual politicians or individual dictators or individual CEOs. It's beyond them too, because they're not that smart. They think they're holding the reins to this thing, but they're not. They just think they are, and we think they are, but they're not. The corporations are another example. Corporation has its own kind of collective intelligence. So there are these various kind of collective intelligences out there. And when the collective intelligences themselves find a way to network, to kind of coalesce or precipitate into some larger structure, again, I think it's happening right now. I think it's happening in real time. I think we can see it happening. It's exciting times. It just is.
Yeah. And I love how you built the layers of what's going on metaphysically, ontologically, and epistemically. And I'll maybe try in a ham-handed way to embellish it just a little bit from what I meditate on. And so in your Genesis story, I like to try to balance. I'm always about the continuity and the scale invariance and how things are iterative. Topology. Right, how things are iterative or anyway, so I try to balance the idea of unitarity and cellularity concomitant with each other, or concomitantly existing or being, or how, I don't want to reify it. I don't want to give it an ontic status, but that so that the totality of what has coalesced from potential into what we would call, again, physicality or discrete packets of materiality, that as you said, in multiple metaphysical layering or ontological layering develops where we find ourselves at the moment. But I always try to humble that by saying that it is unitarity. And so this helps to bring us back into where you're talking about collective intelligence, sort of constellating or coalescing into the nextness, into what might be in the history of self-organization and allopoietic and autopoietic systems like ourselves, and we are generating allopoietic systems, i.e. the machine learning, to further this. And I'll throw one more thing out that kind of gets my brain steaming a little bit, is the idea of consciousness and intelligence as not having ontic status, as not having this reifiable capacity, that it's one of those Cohen things. It is and it is not, so it's like information is more of a metric than it is a constituent or a building block of a physical reality. It's an abstracted construction material. It's an abstract construction material, if that makes any sense. Like I hold in, and there's a couple of authors that or academics that have been talking about what you were just talking about. I'll get the names to it totally escapes me, but I've heard some interesting lectures recently, and I'm wasting time at this point trying to remember them. But anyway, so I always try to say recursivity and scale invariance and like you said, attractors into finding topology but that it's all the same unitary singular oneness
process.
That is right. Processorial. So we'll bring the the Whiteheadian kind of idea of concressing. Of things compressing into actual occasions, etc. It's mind blowing. But so to get to where you are with Nextness, and correct me please, but in granting that intelligence it neither is nor is not, as I would put consciousness, it neither is nor is not, but it is, in the isness is so apparent to us at this level of ontology where we are being and doing and feeling and operating, and we recognize information, we recognize intelligence. So to a question that can form from all this rambling, what is intelligence doing in self-organizing systems on one order and autopoietic systems on another order, and what has arisen, and not to sound hubristic, but what humans have wrought and are experiencing. What does a unitary intelligence, if it's circling back on itself, if it's a circular system, what's an end state? What is the nextness going to become? What is it going to be? Or not be?
I just don't know, and I'm not sure there's a way we can know. I mean, does a neuron know what it's doing for the brain? Like, does a neuron have any idea that the neuron knows that it's got a job? A neuron knows that it's got neurons nearby that it's cooperating with and communicating with it. But does a neuron have any idea? Or do neurons argue about whether there is such a thing as a brain? Right. The neurons have theological debates about the existence of this brain, this collective intelligence that they're all participating with. Well, in a sense, who knows?
Right.
But intelligence, intelligence is a very precise kind of activity. And we know a lot about what the math of that activity is, but generally speaking, there's a good definition. Data is a difference that makes a difference. Difference is any difference that makes a difference. So a difference could be the difference between 0 and 1. The difference could be the difference between a red light and a green light. The difference could be the difference between red hair and blonde hair. It's any difference that makes a difference somewhere else. Right. So these differences are like potentials. That's what they are. They're Whiteheadian concrescences that haven't concressed yet. But as soon as it makes a difference, as soon as it has that impact or that relationship on something else, then it becomes information. Okay. So what happens is that you have all these potentials out there, and as soon as it makes a difference, then you have compressed, I guess, if we want to use that language, into something like a network. And the network grows, and the network changes, and the network evolves, and the network just is a system of differences that are kind of mutually supporting and mutually reinforcing, and And it just it literally is a life of its own. That's what the network is. So as we go through our lives trying to understand new data, new information, new stories, new relationships, new options, and what we're doing is we're synthesizing, right? What we're doing is we're building a network which, as it grows, it starts off kind of sparse, kind of abstract, and it becomes more and more concrete, more and more specific as we integrate new information, right? And again, information is differences, perceptual differences is generally understood to be sort of the baseline for us. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is that happens on all these different levels that we were talking about, right? And so there's this continuing relationship between what I've been calling a foundation and a platform, right? So if you think of the subatomic quantum possibilities as being the foundation, then when those things concrete, they concrete into the platform of something like physical reality. And that becomes a platform. And then within that platform, there are a whole different order of possibilities form. So there's intelligence at all of those levels. They just are intelligence. Intelligence just is the data coming into network formation, coming into relation, sort of precipitating. It's like a phase state change, right? That sort of precipitates into this new network. What the possibilities are of that network are always open-ended. So, but then, it happens, and then these new possibilities form, and like I said, that becomes the platform. That platform becomes a new foundation for a whole new world of possibilities. It's intelligent all the way through. It's information flowing all the way through. Now, when that arrives when that makes that kind of phase change from more or less independent neurons to a complete kind of human perceptual experience, well, then we experience that as what we call consciousness. Right? That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's just that event, those data sort of coming out of quantum superposition to either yes or no. It's a red light, it's a green light. Right. And then it makes a difference, right? If it's a red light, we stop, hopefully. And if it's a green light, we go and we make those decisions, right?
Yeah.
But it's intelligent at every step of the way. And it's open-ended at every step. And it's always kind of fundamentally indeterminate, but it's the process of those possibilities becoming determinate, becoming, actual occasions. If you still like Whitehead, I didn't ever used to like Whitehead, mainly because I had no idea what the heck he was talking about.
He's so abstruse. Yeah.
But more recently, I'm sort of starting to appreciate, I sort of get what he's doing now in a way that I didn't before. Like, that makes sense. Because what he's talking about is, the reason it's so abstract is because he wants to formulate a new language that describes that process from any foundation to any new platform. And that even though the empirical laws are different, quantum physics versus Einsteinian relativity versus biology versus sociology versus spirituality. The laws are different, but the pattern is the same. Yeah. And so if you can come up with a language that describes what's the same, well, then you've got a very powerful theory, because on the one hand, it's a framework that is sort of the success, I guess, in finding a grand theory of everything, but it's not a theory of everything that answers all the questions. It's a theory of everything that just puts these different platforms in relationship to each other. The biologist still has the job of studying biology, because biology has its own rules, its own order of meanings. But of course, it's not complete. Why? Because it's not complete on the front end, because how those rules arise from chemistry chemistry doesn't answer those questions. And it's incomplete on the other end, because once you have biology, what's going to happen next? How is that going to form societies? You don't know, because societies as such have their own histories. And then how is that going to form individuals? You don't know. Any given individual in the same society, they're going to be dealing with they're going to be speaking the same language, they're going to be parts of the same institutions, but their role within those societies is going to be individual. and they don't, and not until they form full individuals, not until we understand how we're different from other people, even as we come into relationship with other people, that's how we get to the next, kind of jump to the next platform, which is generally what we call culture or spirituality.
Yeah.
So again, what we're doing now as we speak is really culture, is spirituality. We're forming works of art, literature, my deck of cards, whatever it is, and then what those things do once they kind of get out into that new cultural ecosystem, who knows? But there seems to be this momentum there. There seems to be this trajectory, this energy towards self-organization, towards unification, towards synthesis, towards the formation of the next new foundation, which will serve as the ground of possibility for who the heck knows what, right?
Well, I think, like you said, there are hints and clues embedded in our history and in potentia. And so another analogy I like to do, and this is all due to Michael Levin. He's out of Tufts. I've had him on a few times. He's a developmental biologist. He talks about aggregation of intelligences. He uses the Jamesian diverse problem solving as another means of describing intelligence. So it's diverse problem solving. And so when he talks about a collective forming, an aggregation of intelligences, which is our cellular system, like you said a moment ago, does the neuron know or care? Does it wish to examine all of the questions, the moral and ethical and things, or is it tasked with a responsibility to its next neuron, to its partner neuron? Or I always like to go to the liver. Do all liver cells work in a kind of default organizational unitarity to keep the liver going, because they're all dependent on each other? And so I extract that out of what the body is doing when it is in homeostasis, and look at our cellularity of 8 billion humans who are, as you pointed out, and this is something huge that I want to maybe put down on the table. We're 8 billion cells in a system nested in our garden, in our mother planet.
And we're diversified, right? Some of us are liver cells, some of us are blood cells,
right?
Some of us are neurons.
But just like we understand that a body can have an autoimmune condition, or that a body can develop malignancies, or neurodegenerative disorders, here comes my big thing I want to put down on the table. We have the Promethean fire of metacognitive capability, of self-reflection, of the ability to, as Michael Levin calls it, it's a cognitive light cone. We can project forward into the future, ideas, plans, aspirations, or diabolical schemes, or we can also look back into the past, regret, or be nostalgic and all these other things, or extract the wisdom and intelligence and the data of the past to inform us in a kind of Bayesian updating, the active inference kind of thing into the future. And so it maybe Promethean fire isn't the right thing, and this is the Edenic myth, right? The fall of man kind of thing. Like I think Jung was sort of pointing that as a fall into metacognition or self-reflection that gave us this incredible horsepower that can go so terribly wrong, but it also can be that means to the nextness that would allow for 8 billion cells to work in a non pathological, in a pro-social kind of way. That I think is maybe pointing to what you're talking about. I'll stop there and hand it back to you.
I also, this is something that I'm just starting to work on now, and it's sort of like phase 2, I guess, of the Empyrean project, for, something that's just in the works now, and maybe will develop over the next couple of years. I think that part of the reason why the archetypes are the archetypes, the reason why they are what they are, and why we have the stories that they do, the fall of the garden, the fall from grace, the Garden of Eden, the apple, man and woman, all these images, the kind of network, I guess, of mythological elements, I guess. They're telling something about what intelligence is, about what consciousness is. Ultimately, that's why we project into this sort of blank slate, I guess, this blank canvas of mythic stories, right? These are stories that, strictly speaking, are not about anything, right? They're just sort of free floating information. And because there's no traction, because they're not meant to explain any particular historical or personal event, because they have sort of this sphere of their own, what happens is that they end up projecting and expressing consciousness itself, the modes of intelligence itself, right? And so what that looks like is just what we've been talking about, the same series of patterns or cluster of patterns that happens anytime you make that transition, or you see that transition from one order of being to the next higher order of complexity within it, right? It's a very consistent series, right? The requirements, and this is, and again, this is why I'm trying to learn math, basically, because the mathematics in information theory and network theory describes basically a phase change of how networks grow and diversify, and how they network formation and evolution. What happens when you lose nodes? What happens when more nodes come? What is sort of required to keep those networks stable, and not just stable, but moving in a very specific direction? Because as we've been saying over and over again, there's a direction, right? There's this thing called entropy, which, if nothing else, shows us that time has an arrow. We're going forward. Right. And that forwardness, that direction is on the one hand entropic, but on the other hand is the anti-entropic complexity of autopoiesis, of self-creation, of synthesis, of things that things are what it looks like for most people is that there are these sort of exceptions, that consciousness and intelligence and synthesis are sort of exceptional in that they fight entropy. And I don't know why we think this, but we sort of assume that entropy is the norm, entropy is what's out there, and information is sort of contradictory, and it is somehow magically and mysteriously countering entropy. But actually, I think it's just the opposite. I think that that the true kind of ground or true kind of background state of the universe is towards synthesis, towards concrescence, towards network formation. And it just happens to be the case that anytime you generate order in one place, it has a heat. It generates heat. And the heat is measured as entropy. And if the heat can be evacuated, right? If you can kind of keep your kind of exhaust system clear, the heat, doesn't do any damage. But the heat is generated in any case, and it can cook your network, right? And so it's a matter of waste heat disposal, basically. That what we're seeing is entropy is not the baseline; it's actually the product of intelligence doing its thing.
Okay.
That's what I think.
So in living systems being negentropic or negatively entropic temporarily systems, are you thinking that with a kind of new neogenesis into a more better organized, like a more stable entropic
platform, system, network,
system, platform, whatever's going on, that will that be able to sustain itself as negatively entropic, or will so let's open. And are we talking Shannon, or are we talking what's the other entropy? Sorry, my mind. But yeah, the where we are with relativistic physics and dissipative physical energy versus informational entropy. Are they in concert with each other? So the informational and the more substance oriented entropy, energetic entropy, I guess.
I think that just as in every order there's a specific kind of information, also in every order there's a specific kind of entropic byproduct, right? So obviously in a physical system, that's physical heat. In our lives, that's just sort of the chaos of our lives, right? Right. Even as I'm trying to make sense of some things, and this is what we do as humans, right? We make decisions about what's valuable and but as soon as we decide that this thing is valuable, then that means that there's other things that are less valuable. We make decisions about what's good and virtuous. But as soon as I decide that this is good and this is virtuous, then I've created that which is bad and vicious, right? Mm-hmm. That as I'm kind of creating a life story or a platform or my own kind of personal religion for what makes sense, by definition, as soon as I commit to one possibility or one structure, that means there's other possibilities or other structures that don't get included, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's tough. There's always the sense that a new formation, a nascent formation, is it could fail. There's always a sense that it could die. There's always a sense that any given form of life could just be a dead end, mm-hmm. right? There's a sense, and this is kind of a mythological thing. There's a sense that some of us, for whatever reason, are not going to make the cut. Mm-hmm. That if there's 5 different quantum physics researchers who have 5 different ideas about how it's going to work, some of them are going to be right and some of them are going to be wrong. Mm-hmm. In the long run, whatever your kind of time span for measuring is. And that's part of the system, actually, because even the people who are wrong are contributing by acting as a friction or a stopping board or conversation partner with the people who eventually get it right. And so there's this kind of ecosystem effect, right? Even if you say this, I don't think this is necessarily true, but even if you say only humans have attained a certain level of self-consciousness, like I said, I don't know that that's true. But even if that were true, the way that humans attain the kind of special self-consciousness that they have is through their relationships in the ecological order, through hunting, through predation, through being killed by other species, by through the patterns of growth and the development of our immune systems and, mm-hmm. and adopting bacteria as our symbiotes, right? The ones that digest our food for us, right? It's precisely through all of these, network relations that even if those other, life forms are just a means to an end, which again is not quite how I think about it, even then they attain a kind of immortality through their relationship with us. And then those of us humans who attain, some kind of fame or some kind of, subjective immortality through, having been the creator of some form of art, again, they're not operating alone. Maybe we only remember Einstein and we don't remember, Hilbert or, all these other people who kind of, that he was building off of. But even they are important because without them, then Einstein never would have happened. And he knows that. And he was always honest about that, Mm-hmm. So I forgot what question that was answering, or I think we sort of got off track, but.
Well, we were talking about, just, poking a stick into the abyss of nextness or not even the abyss, the potentia of nextness. And it kind of leads me, if we're talking about something like, energetic entropy, space-time entropy and materiality, in a dissipative sense. So I'm maybe pointing towards the heat death theory, mm-hmm. that it also going again, full circle into unitarity beyond what we apprehend, that intelligence in a matrix with consciousness or self-organizing principle as potentia, that it's not substrate dependent necessarily. And it is, as far as we can tell, we are in a substrate. We are obligates to a substrate oriented intelligence, information, energy kind of network matrix kind of thing. But I wonder if things are circular, recursive, iterative, scaling out, but nonetheless completely obligate to its history. does it all go back to a kind of pure potential, but with the added expansion of memory of what was, again, if we want to talk about singularity, Big Bang type stuff, where, things coalesce and aggregate and complexify, as you said, and complexification upon complexification and the relationships that develop there. I wonder if we can intuit, again, trying to see the totality of things, beyond the nextness, like what could be infinitely informationally I'm getting lost now. I don't even think there's a concept.
Well, it sounds like, let me fill in the blanks. It sounds like what you're saying is that there's maybe a relationship or maybe a distinction between what's sort of immediately next for humans in our continuing development.
Right.
Versus a kind of ultimate sort of finality,
like what is the system, no system doing? Is it just oscillating itself, and perturbing itself? And, does it go through these cycles of coalescence into materiality, what we call materiality? So again, I'm appealing to the quantum pure potential, and it just sort of jettisons forth this thing and then retracts, and maybe it has a memory. Maybe it is in a very deep time or non-time sense. Experiencing and learning.
I think that's true. I think that the patterns of intelligence, and that's what the patterns are ultimately. They're patterns of intelligence. They're patterns of how intelligence operates, how it transforms, how it lives or dies, where there's a dead end versus where there's a whole new source. And it's like, you know what it's like? I think it's sort of like a long distance runner who, along the way, every so many miles or every so many days, there's like a catch of water and food and maybe a place to rest. And if the runner is going in the right direction and is following the right course, then the runner will find another store, right? Another energy source. And then the runner can keep going, right? So there's all these sort of stops along the way. But again, if the runner doesn't find the next, doesn't find one of those things in time, then the whole thing stops. I think it's important that the project is precarious. I think it's important that the thing could go wrong. I think it's important that not every project succeeds. On the other hand, we've done extraordinarily well so far, right? There's signs that the system is very, very stable, right? We do have a memory. We do have a sense of how far back this goes. We do have intuitions of worlds within worlds within worlds. And that, for kind of our human understanding, it stops at quantum potential, right? That seems to be the last level back, or the biggest level. But you know what? There's probably levels, but there's no reason not to think that what we call quantum potential is a platform that has been built on something else that has its own ground, and a ground before that, and a ground before that, right? There's no reason not to think, and some pretty good reasons to think, that it really is infinities upon infinities upon infinities, that there's eternities within eternities within eternities, and that we're somewhere in the middle. We're just one set of eternities within a infinitely larger set of eternities. And that's part of what makes it fun. That's part of what makes it interesting. So how far back does it go? Who knows? How far forward will it go? Who knows? I think that understanding that we are sort of halfway along the way is sort of a good orientation, I guess, a good constellation to read by.
Right. Yeah. I mean, all we can see is flickers and glimpses of things and speculate on that. And I love that, because No problem.
But keep talking, I can hear you.
Okay, no problem.
I'm just going to plug in here.
No problem.
You can edit this out.
No, I'll keep it in. My people are used to, my subscribers used to me being kind of a Ed Wood type. Yeah, one take, that's it. So anyway, no, but I think that I love the word humility, which is grounding, you know, and so knowing how insignificant, in a sense, this little speck of what is a massive physical universe that we can understand it to be, that, like you said, is just recursive, iterative, just out, you know, who knows, but that brings us back to, probably far more important questions, which we were touching on a moment ago before I went off into cosmic land and non-cosmic land. And so I'll bring us back into understanding something that you were touching on a little while ago, as we are, what I would consider maybe in our pre-teens, as far as maybe our potential development, that we could reach some kind of a adult stage as humans, if we don't annihilate, you know, go through Fermi's predictions and just sort of, you know, it's over, which, you know, we very much could do. But if we move through the bottleneck and we have our machine learning companions and we have extended mind, you know, producing so much as our companion intelligence, and that in its whole, the mythopoesis of the companion intelligence is both fraught with danger and, you know, unlimited wonderful things that might arise from it. But do you think that this is a adolescent attempt, and I'm speaking to machine learning here, and I'm speaking to where we find ourselves in modernity, that this is our adolescent phase of feeling the lure and the eros of what a organized, coherent, non-pathologized, pro-social, yada, 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 egalitarian, whatever you want, you know, positive valenced, expression of intelligence through this conduit, through these soft virtual machines of humanity. How would you analogize our growth and development, where we find ourselves with these really fairly powerful things that we're cooking up, and like you said, that are far beyond the grasp of the people who are engineering them, themselves.
I think we've got a little bit further to go in terms of the technology, a little bit further to go in terms of the math. We're really close. I think that what we think of as artificial intelligence, namely LLMs, are not as impressive as some people think that they are, and have a lot of problems. But we're refining our techniques, we're refining our technology. So the things that we have now, you know, that people talk a lot about. I think the truest thing to say is that there's stops along the way, that it's, you know, science is always a two-handed project of theory and theorizing and engineering, right? They always go hand in hand, right? And I think that what we have is, like I said, it's getting close. What I will say by way of analogy is just to say that as far as we know, complex molecules are still just molecules. They don't stop being molecules because they've attained a degree of complexity. They're just very, very complex molecules. And just so, life forms don't stop being complex molecules just because they have this whole order of being and all these laws and potentials that are not defined or summarized by the possibilities of the complex molecules. But they're still complex molecules. And just so far as we know, intelligences and perceptions are on the back of cells, you know, life forms, right? And so far as we know, we don't have intelligence, or we don't see intelligences that aren't in some way embodied in physicality. And we don't see culture that's not in the minds of individuals, right? I think that whatever the next, you know, when humans ascend, we won't stop being humans. Right. And if humans were to die, you know, if all the neurons in my brain die, then my brain dies.
Right.
right? There's no brain without the neurons, right? There's no neurons without the cells. There's no cells without complex molecules. There's no complex molecules, right? All the way down. So it's like it's like a building where one story is built atop the previous story. It may be a very, 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 very tall building, right? It may go very, it may be turtles all the way down, right?
Right.
There could be a lot of turtles, but you take away one turtle and the whole thing collapses. And I think sorry about that. And I think that's what people are worried about. I think that people are worried about, something that looks like intelligence, something that acts like intelligence, but that in some way operates left of, or outside of that pathway, right? Because the path, the path, intelligence does have a memory. Memory that's why there's a house of memory in my deck, right? That memory, you just can't get something from nothing. You just can't. What's called nothing is actually a realm of concrete possibilities. That's what they are. They're possibilities that exist in their own order of being, which may be kind of metaphysically quite foreign to the order of being that comes out of them, but you don't get something out of nothing. So whatever happens next of human culture, kind of combining and forming the next sort of level, the next story of collective intelligence, it won't happen without us. If we're afraid, it's because, we're afraid that these tools, it's like the atom bomb or good old fashioned rifles. We're afraid that we've created technologies that will kill us all sort of in the meantime. And I think it's not irrational to be afraid of that. But if we're afraid of that, we should be afraid of the right things. Namely, we should be afraid of individuals using these very, very powerful tools for kind of corrupt ends or short-sighted ends. The idea that they really will take on a life of its own, that's not the problem. That's the goal, actually, because that's how we kind of ascend, right? Just like neurons ascend by forming a brain, humans ascend, human cultures ascend by kind of being a part of collective processes. And the current name for that is planetarity. The current name for that is the idea that humans all across the planet embedded in ecosystems, using technologies, of the internet and the web and however we kind of, generate large systems of information technology, right? It's all information technology. It's all networks, all the way down. Networks. So that's, like I said, that's the thing that we're all working for. That's the thing that's the direction that we're all moving in. But just because we're moving in that direction doesn't mean that we'll get there in our lifetime. Doesn't mean that the human race will get there at all. It doesn't mean that an asteroid won't hit planet Earth and cut the whole thing off. Who knows?
Yeah, but I think maybe to put and I'm not an optimist necessarily, but to put a bit of hope. There's a guy, Dave Snowden, that I follow, and he's a complexity systems scientist, and but he dabbles in social Catholicism, and he goes, if you've given up hope, it's a sin. Don't give up hope. And so I like that, and I repeat that when I can. And it's that I think going back to the analogy of a healthy organ in the body, that if
there's hope, there's my hope
there
card.
You go, beautiful, and that if we can use the virtual machinery or the psychotechnologies of universal spiritual practices like what you're doing, that could be the leverage necessary to allow our species to move beyond adversarial processing, conflict-oriented victim-oriented thinking, all this kind of stuff that's kind of hamstringing us right now. And I'm on a soapbox, and I acknowledge that, but I say this generally and universally, that it's within our species as an aspect of our being. It's a Jungian shadowy thing that is being, like Richard Rohr or Butler said, it's the cult of innocence that is being tamped down. That if we can manage that pathology or whatever it is, and realize that, to get interdependent speak for a minute, that it takes a coherent, healthy organ of a species, our species, in conjunction with intelligence and technology and things like that, that we may have that hope, that we can move through the Fermian bottleneck and move out into, and certainly not utopia, certainly not anything that's, going to devolve into some kind of crazy cult, but that it's just that I think when you take a human being who isn't struggling with some kind of psychopathy or anything like that, that we all have very common aspirations, that we want, if we have children, we want them to be healthy and have a healthy home and environment. We want ourselves to have health and well-being. And so if we can find that commonality in cellularity as well as unitarity, that's the kind of spiritual elixir of life, the elan vital that can come out and help us see that, again, with our, and I like to call information and technology our mechanical slaves of the 21st century, and I mean that in a good way. Like the tractor replaced the horse and the plow, and look what happened. We were able to feed ourselves more efficiently, and there's costs, obviously, like anything, but or the what is it, the Malachian dilemma, but that these new mechanical slaves, these intelligence machines that we are working with, are again our companions that can move us. And so that's my hope. That's kind of what keeps me from just falling into utter existential despair.
Yeah, I think we're hardwired for, among other things, hope. We are humans, and we're all built the same way. And part of what that means is that we are intelligent systems, and that we have within us all of the kind of basic aspects or dimensions or laws, I guess, that determine what has worked for, not just in the lifetime of our species, but for billions of years, right? That these principles of network formation and evolution have been doing their thing for a long, long time. And as they get more specific, as they get more concrete, the challenges are greater, right? The hurdles to overcome are higher. The amount of complexity is going up degrees, orders of magnitude, more complexity. And that means more. And if I'm right, and it's the complexity that actually generates entropy, we're generating a lot of entropy. We're generating a lot of heat, right? And that's why we feel so hot. That's why the planet is warming. It's because we've become so orderly, so concrete, so specific. And so the next bottleneck is going to be to figure out how to continue the growth that we want without cooking ourselves, right? Finding ways to kind of evacuate that heat energy, finding ways to kind of overcome the challenges that we're kind of setting for ourselves. But intelligent networks, among other things, have to have ways of defeating adversaries, have to have immune systems for defeating their own parts that have gone megalomaniac, right?
Right.
For overcoming corruptions of the data, right? Because the data as it moves can get corrupted and generally does get corrupted eventually. And so you have to have correction mechanisms. And that's what culture is, right? That's what culture is for humans. Culture is meant to be, kind of ideally, the set of teachings, wisdom, strategies, techniques for reminding us where we're going, reminding us how we get there, reminding us of what the dangers are, reminding us of what the criteria are for something that's going well versus something that's cancerous or is an autoimmune reaction or is an outside invader. So intelligence has to be very, very savvy, right? It has to be able to have means of recognizing the various kinds of dangers, and the various strategies for integrating them, for working around them. And again, I think that's what culture is. And I think that's what the archetypes are. They're very, very abstract, units of wisdom, the technologies. And I think it's a complete set. I think that we do have all of the information we need. I think we have all of the intelligence that has functioned for billions of years and has resulted in us, in principle, has what it takes, has what it needs to keep on going. That doesn't make it inevitable, but it means that we can do it if we sort of are continually reminding ourselves where we've been, where we're going, what we want as humans, and being honest with each other, calling each other out about things that are not successful, things that are corrupting society, things that are dragging us down, things that are endangering our own selves, right?
And we have on board these somatic physical systems, sensory apparatus for sensory motor loops of negative affective states, of pain, of negatively valent states. So we do have the hardware to give us feedback on that. And we don't want to,
just as we can measure that the planet is warming, and that's and just as we can tell that the warming of the planet is causing these problems.
When you said the heat that emerges, I have a tower that has a water cooled CPU. There's a way to engineer heat dispersal, and there's a fan, and it goes, and it's the heat exchange principle. So, Asher, we've covered a lot. We're right at about an hour, and I think for sure I'd love to have you back for another conversation. But let's not cut it off right now. What I'm thinking is we'll bring it in for a landing. We'll finish out some thoughts. But yeah, this has been really neat. It's kind of what I imagined it would be, so I appreciate that. But let's again, if you, as we did in the other part that we'll call not one or two, what do we want to do that might be summative or aspirational, like, again, hope filled, that we can inspire ourselves and keep the spiritual energy flowing for ourselves?
Yeah, well, I think I'll say two quick things about that. Number one is the way that we get to, the way we make the progress, I guess, that we've been talking about, the way we get to the next level, I guess, of collective intelligence is perhaps counterintuitively just by doing what we do, right? Just by involution, by digging deep into our own individuality, into our own spirituality, by finding the things that bring us joy. Right. This is sort of hokey, but I think it's really, really true, that finding the things in life that aren't just the accomplishments and attainments that we think we're supposed to accomplish and attain, but by really honing in on our true nature, our true selves, our natural intelligence. That means listening to our intuitions, finding the music that we love, making the music that we love, figuring out what our talents are, what our desires are, and doing the work of integration so that we kind of gradually hone in on a form of life in which we have the maximum energy, the maximum pleasure, the maximum gratitude, the maximum kind of relationality with all the people in our lives. And that's just good old fashioned calling, right? That's just the good old fashioned finding the place where our talents, desires meet the world's needs and affordances, right? Finding the place where those two things overlap, finding your happy spot. And that can be a lot of work. So I guess the second part is don't give up on that work, because it is work. Because even though the outcome is joy and contentment and healthy relationships and a healthy society, it can be some work to get there. And so look for the people who can help you, look for the communities that will support you, look for the tools that make sense for you, whether it's the Empyrean Deck or a tarot deck or the I Ching or idealist, analytic idealism, some kind of philosophical, or whether it's math, whether math is your mode, whatever your autistic special interest is, because we all have one, use that, in the best possible way. And just keep on doing it, because if we as individuals keep on doing it, then that ascension will happen all by itself, right? It's self-organizing. It's self-actualizing, in the cosmos and on the planet. And the way that we do that is by just doing our own little part in the kind of cosmic machinery.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, in that thinking that if enough people gravitate towards that, then normatives will change, and societal expression will be influenced by that. And I don't think it will take that much to help bring about. Again, this is not kumbaya. This is not utopia. This is just, like you said, it's a movement in a direction that we won't even define, that allows for human well-being, human flourishing, which again, I think if you can get people into groups and they can start getting caught up in group identity, but then if you pull somebody back and say, what's important to you, and what is of value to you for your future self, for who you are going to be tomorrow. And again, I think it comes down to some very core constitutive things that we can all relate to. And you mentioned something earlier, that transcendence and self-development or self-transcendence is not about the absolute destruction of the self or the ego. It's good to shatter it once in a while, especially if you identify very strongly with a self, that, dropping a hit of acid or going and meditating for a week in silence, will break the frame for you, and that you can, know that it's, as some will say, it's a construction. It's all, they come out of that with that epiphany, like, oh my God, it was all just some, bullshit construction that I put together. But you have to reassemble and coalesce back down into a self-making system, and an identity system and a persona system. All that is deeply important, and you touched on that, and I just want to bring that back out for reiteration, that's so important. But in doing that you can embed what you and I have been kind of covering in the summit of bringing things to a close, is that the self-making, the identity-making, the persona-making, the prophilic self that we have now in the age of social media, that can be fluid, it can be dynamic, and some of it's not malleable. There's obviously the subconscious, but that what we have access to, that what we have control over, that we think we have control over, can do what you have been saying, that it can be an aspiration of ours to level up and to express in the healthiest possible way, for your sake as well as anyone else that's embedded with you in a cultural paradigm or whatever you want to call it. So that's my hope. What little facet of hope is that, and I have to do that too. I mean, we all are charged with that task. So Asher,
it's what we all want.
I think so. I think so. And again, we can get caught up in the ride the stigmergic wave, and, we can have these sort of collective feelings, which again, that can be good. But, when we pull back and we have time, and that's what contemplative and meditative practices or mindfulness can afford us, I think, is that ability to introspect, in contemplative, and also deconstruct somewhat in mindfulness or meditation, is that, we can realize the fluidity of our selfness. So anyway, I'll stop preaching about identity and self. But Asher, this has been wonderful. I know my audience is going to absolutely love this conversation, because again, this is what I think they are looking at and looking for and looking into. So thank you so much for your wisdom and for the things that you're doing in the Empyrean project, all that you do. And I look forward to, again, further development and further growth and expansion of what you're doing. And so again, I'd love to have you back. I want to make sure that we get you back for another conversation. Maybe we'll let a little time and space expand a little bit before we bring you back. But let's open up another conversation down the road and see where you are and what you're doing. And we can also riff on some things that maybe, again, aspirational, and hopeful. That would be great. It's been awesome. It's been a real pleasure. For me as well, and hopefully YouTube audience, and I'll acknowledge you all. Thank you so much for being here for the conversation. I hope this was this was a good conversation for you, because things can be a little swirly out there. And so grounding ourselves in things like this and just asking these kind of questions, to me, at least, and I'm going to speak for Asher here, are significant and a wonderful part of what we do as metacognitive creatures. So anyway, all right. So Asher, I'll say goodbye to you after I stop the record, but to the YouTube audience, again, thank you for your time and attention. I very much appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next episode.